Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Drive Pink Dialogue. I'm your host, Scotty. I'm here with my co-host, Saur, and it is game week. Inter Miami plays Nashville SC in the first game of the first round of the playoffs on Friday night. We are going to spend a ton of time talking about Inter Miami versus Nashville, but we're not going to start tonight. Tonight, we're going to look at 10 numbers that help tell the story of the 2025 season. But before we get into that, as always, my friend, my co-host, Saur, how are you feeling today, my man?
It's Tuesday, which means the weekend is still a ways away, which means I'm still tired. So the fact that there's a game on Friday means that there's something to look forward to earlier than Saturday. And I'm excited for that. But I'm glad that we're having this light conversation, which, is all about Inter Miami. And it's always fun to talk about Inter Miami with you. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. I think that this is a really interesting episode, and I actually think if we had spent 2 weeks planning it, it could have been awesome. Instead, we spent less than 2 days planning it, and so
When did
it's
we
going to be
ever
good.
spend 2 weeks planning an episode? Except the magnum opus that we did at the start of the season. That's the
Uh,
only one that I remember.
I think that you need to be putting in more work to hold up your end of the bargain if you're not
That
thinking
is
about these
true.
things 2 weeks in advance.
That is very true.
Kidding, of course. That said, I maybe think this could be something we do every year and maybe have this planned out a little bit better next time. That said, maybe we shouldn't talk down about it first. Let's get to the quick hitters. Couple things I did want to say because I think they deserve to at least be said. We don't have to have a conversation about this, but a couple recent retirements around the MLS that I think are worthy of at least a mention. Darlington Nagbe, one of my favorite MLS players, announced a couple weeks ago he was going to retire. And as a player for the Columbus Crew last year, Inter Miami versus Columbus was like the big rivalry. And he was a big part of that, and he's been one of my favorite players. So I wanted to acknowledge that he was retiring. And then also Brad Guzan, who certainly has a place in the Inter Miami story, is also retiring, played his last game on Saturday night. Those two players no longer going to be thorns in Inter Miami's side moving forward.
Brad Guzan, if only he'd done this maybe a year earlier, Inter Miami's story right now would be different, and maybe we'd have another trophy in our trophy cabinet. Darlington Nagbe, one of the best defensive midfielders in the league. I still remember very fondly how Yannick Bright proved to the world that he's arrived after locking Darlington Nagbe down in the games against Columbus last season. I remember both of them fondly, so it's sad to see good players retire, but that's what it always comes down to. Wishing them a lovely retirement, a well-deserved retirement, and that's about it that I have to say on this.
Yeah, I'm not going to miss Brad Guzan, but Nagbe a little bit. And then also I just want to mention Ronnie Dyla of the Atlanta United infamy now. They built a team last offseason that we thought was going to be awesome, and they sucked this year. And now they fired their coach, which means I think going into next year, we're going to have to be a little on our P's and Q's, at least early in the season, if we have to play Atlanta, because I still think they have good talent on that roster. Just they were not able to get the most out of it this year.
I think if they click, they're going to be very dangerous.
Okay, going back to Inter Miami, the big news of today for the Herons on the roster is that Messi missed practice because he has a minor back pain. We have no idea what the injury is. We have no idea if it's an injury or he just, was a little sore from sleeping on it weird last night. We have no reason to think that he's going to miss Friday night's game, but we thought we should mention it because that did happen today. Are you concerned at all, or you think this is nothing?
This is the first I'm hearing of this, so a little concerned, but feels like back injury when it's not contact, when it's not muscle during the game. Maybe he's just pulled something while sleeping. More to come on it tomorrow, I guess. We'll find out. I don't think he's going to miss the playoffs. He might take injections to get through it, but I doubt he'd want to miss the playoffs unless it's very, very severe.
Yeah, I'd be shocked if he did. And then the other thing, Akram Koner, who's a journalist, transfer journalist, reported today that Inter Miami is going to offer Robert Lewandowski a 2-year contract. His contract with Barcelona ends next summer at the end of June. So he could theoretically come in next summer as you would imagine a DP striker. Any thoughts on that? I mean, it's not the point of this episode, but it is a rumor, so we should mention it.
That means Suarez is probably going to leave if Robert Lewandowski comes in, and Thomas Müller and Robert Lewandowski in the same league at the same time. That'd be fun. I'm not against it. I think Robert Lewandowski is a fantastic player, has had a fantastic career. Just depends on how motivated he is and what his reasons are for coming to Inter Miami, and whether he's still willing to perform and contribute at the same level as he's done at Barcelona and at Bayern Munich and at Dortmund.
Yeah, I don't know if this one makes sense to me because he doesn't. Everyone seemingly has a connection to either the coaching staff or Lionel Messi himself. And this player seemingly doesn't and isn't from Argentina. And obviously, we all know who Lewandowski is, but like he plays at Barcelona, but was never a teammate with Messi. This one just feels weird. I don't know why he would come here. And as far as Suarez, I don't think this affects Suarez at all, if I'm being totally honest with you. So I just think it's a rumor, and if it's going to become serious, it's going to become serious next June, or May, not anytime soon. So thought I'd mention it, but I don't know. I don't feel particularly strongly about it right now.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's get to the bulk of this episode because we have 10 numbers that we think tell a story of this season for Inter Miami. A lot of different aspects, a couple that are related, a couple on individual players that I think illuminates what their season was like, good or bad. A couple related to the team that I think are illuminative of what this team went through in 2025. So let's get started with the first number, and that is 52. And it relates to the number of games played by Inter Miami in the 2025 season. That's a lot. Last year, they only played 45, and they still have at least 2 more to go and possibly up to 6. They could play 58 games this year if they go 3 games in the first round and then all the way to the MLS Cup final. And if that would happen, it would be by far the most any MLS team has ever done. Even Barcelona, I looked it up, had only played 60 games, made it to the Champions League semifinal this past year. Only played 60 games, and they have a much deeper roster than anything Inter Miami could put together. So that is a ton of games, a ton of minutes to be played. I think we've talked about some of the really high number of minutes that guys like Busquets and Alba and Messi and Suarez have played this year. What's your instant reaction to that?
Somebody once said that a successful team plays a lot of games in the season. And I like to believe that. A team that is playing a lot means they're in a lot of competitions, means that they're going far in competitions, and means that they're competing for a lot of trophies. So my first takeaway is fairly positive that Inter Miami has made a deep run in a lot of the competitions that they've been in. And I think that's been true. CONCACAF Champions Cup got to the semifinals. Leagues Cup got to the finals. We even got further in the Club World Cup than we thought. So we have played a lot more games by virtue of being competitive and by virtue of getting further in tournaments, obviously in the MLS, playing just as many games as we would expect. So that's a good sign. That means Inter Miami has been performing well and getting far. But the issue is Inter Miami doesn't have the roster depth that some of these European teams have to play 60 games a year. Inter Miami, especially under this coach, has relied primarily on a set of 14 players, I would say, who have constantly been used, rotated, and overused at times, which means that Inter Miami playing 52 games this season so far also implies tired legs in the squad, especially with our older players that we have.
Yeah, I think you nailed the headline, which is Inter Miami did well in terms of advancing. Made it out of the group stage of the Club World Cup, went deep to the semifinals of the CONCACAF Champions Cup, obviously played in the final of the Leagues Cup. And by the way, we have at least 2, and again up to 6 games left So the first thing is you had real success in your competitions, your cup competitions, in the competitions that determine how many games you're going to play. But also, it means that you were forced to behave in a certain way that allowed you to stay healthy and fit and fighting through those 52 plus games. And that has been one of the stories of the season. We've seen lots of guys go through injuries, especially some of the younger players, for short periods, and some of them for long periods. If you're talking about guys like Obando and David Ruiz, but even the Yannick Brights and the Noah Allens, they had their 4 weeks out of the healthy 11, and Ian Frey, and so Chelo Weigand, like a lot of guys had to miss game time, but the ones that didn't played a ton of minutes. And I'm still never going to be convinced that that doesn't have at least partially something to do with the retirement of Jordi Alba and Sergio Busquets. So lots of factors, and I think it points to one of the things that we've been talking about all year, the inexperience of the coaching staff on how to handle that. And I think this is maybe one of the most difficult lessons a young coach has to learn in his development. If you know exactly what you have in front of you, it's much easier to plan for. It's much easier to have a sustained and organized plan to attack the schedule if you know it's going to be 34 games, or maybe 35 if you include a U.S. Open Cup game. But once you start getting into dynamic schedules where you're not sure if next week you're going to play one game or two, if you're not sure if you're going to go to if you're going to have to reschedule games because you're going deeper in tournaments, that becomes much more difficult for a young manager to, I think, handle, because he's never had to deal with, well, this player gets tired faster, and this player can only go once a week, and this guy, if he goes 4 games in a row, he's going to start losing his sort of his ability. Like his production is going to drop a little bit. How do I manage this to get the best out of my entire roster? How do I utilize the entire roster to make sure my best players are fit and firing when I need them? Lionel Messi even was not 100% healthy for the Leagues Cup final. And you do have to always ask yourself, was there a way to get him a few less minutes early in the season so that he was 100% ready for that game? That's a hypothetical. I'm not going to put the blame on it, but I think it is important to remember this when we judge this season, that they played a ton of games by the standards of almost everyone on the team.
Yeah, and I think one thing we ought to do when we're discussing these stats is make sure we measure that to the eye test as well. And a lot of the times during the season, you can tell. We obviously had the infamous quote from Julian Gressel saying that Inter Miami can only play at a high level or at a high energy pace, 30 minutes, and then they drop down. And you can tell that Inter Miami as a team is not conducive to playing high pace football throughout the course of 90 minutes in a game. Whether that has to do with old legs on the field, whether that has to do with tired legs on the field, this is not the most athletic team. When that happens, the playing time needs to be dispersed across the players. And I think you've mentioned it well, that you can almost forgive Javier Mascherano, at least in the first few games, to rely a little bit on his best players. But over the course of the season, the one indicator should have been that he's learning to use the roster well, to understand the pros and cons of not just the superstar players that we have, but also the rest of the players in and around the squad. The Allende's, the Segovias, the Baltazars, the Luhans. What do they need to get the best out of them? How many minutes are they able to play? I think he's done well managing somebody like Ian Frey. I think you and I both would probably like to play him more, but given his history record, you can almost forgive Javier Mascherano for playing him slightly less, alternating between Weigand and Ian Frey. But I think the playing time hasn't been dispersed properly. And the last point that had come to my mind when I looked at this statistic was also, when you play that many games, there's inevitably going to be a period for each player where they don't have the best form. They go through a bit of a difficult patch. Javier Mascherano's strategy has been to just run players into the ground until they find form again, if they ever do. And I think Allende is the best case in point of that, where he will continue to play regardless. So those are some of the takeaways that I have from this stat. 52 games is a lot, potentially 58 games. A lot of good things coming from this. The fact that Inter Miami has played well, gone far in tournaments, but also for the next season, it might not be as sustainable because you don't want tired players, especially in the playoffs where you have to go at high pace for the next 6 games that you potentially play.
Yeah, just for anyone wondering, the most any MLS team has ever played, 53. So Inter Miami will pass that over the next 2 weeks. That was LAFC in 2023 when they went to the
Wow.
MLS Cup final, which if Inter Miami does that, they'll play 58 games. Okay, let's get to the next one. And the number is 3. And it's the number of games this season that Inter Miami played where the average age was under 27 years old. One of the things that I think is related to what we just talked about is you want to rotate players more if you're going to play more games so that your best players are fresh and healthy and ready to go for the playoffs, and maybe more fresh than healthy because sometimes health is out of our hands, but fresh is certainly within our capacity to manage. And I don't know if we did a great job of that this year, and I think that's reflected in this number. Just for the record, last season, despite playing fewer games, they had 17 games where the average age for a starting 11 in Inter Miami was under 27 years old. This year, only 3. And of those 3 games, 2 of them were the only 2 times this year that Javier Mascherano did full rotation. So not a lot of really young players, not a lot of rotation, I think, among the young players or swapping out a veteran for a young player that would have brought those numbers down. And I think that reflects in sort of what we just talked about with the number of games played. Is everyone as fresh as they need to be in the biggest moments? Was everyone fresh and ready to go for the Club World Cup second round or even the Palmeiras game? Remember, we had injuries to guys like Noah Allen and Yannick Bright. In the Leagues Cup final, Lionel Messi was told by, we were told by Jorge Mas that he wasn't feeling 100%. So not a lot of young players getting a ton of minutes in this team, certainly compared to what is the MLS norm, certainly in comparison to what even is Inter Miami's norm, even in the Messi era.
The question here to ask is that a bad thing? Experience is not a bad thing to have in the squad. So, and I'm not making the judgment here at the moment, but I think one thing we should address is having only 3 games where you had an average team age of 27 below, is that a bad thing? I think in the large scheme of things, in my opinion, we definitely could have employed the youth better. Absolutely. We had that conversation last week, and I don't necessarily want to rehash that, but it hasn't been the best platform to leverage some of the youth talent that we have. That's for sure. And I think this stat kind of shows that. A drop from 17 games to 3 games this season is quite massive. But it's worked in Inter Miami's favor overall, right? We have gone through into the playoffs. We have a very experienced, solid squad.
They certainly haven't. They didn't perform as well this year as they did last year, but that's not the end-all be-all. They were still very good this year. I should also mention the average age was over 29 years old this season compared to about 27 and a half last year. I know someone in the comments is going to say, well, they start Oscar Stardy a ton, so that's the difference. Trade Calendar out, Oscar Stardy in. But I kind of look through that, and that ends up being nullified by Sergei Kristoff out and either Noah Allen or Maxi Falcone or Gonzalo Lujan in. So the numbers actually are, in terms of the profile of who was playing, it definitely went skewed towards the veterans on this team. Also,
the players who were young last season got a year older this season, so that also adds to the average.
Yes, but even that included, they still trended towards the veterans this year. And again, when we're talking about playing a ton of minutes, maybe you think veterans don't need to be playing quite so many minutes. Lots of reasons for it, and this isn't the number that we're going to harp on, but we had a big conversation last week about how many of the young kids were given opportunities, and I do think that's part of the story of the season. But we spent an hour on it last week. I think we can kind of leave this one there. Okay, let's get into the big stuff, because I think there are a couple numbers that really define what success was and was not this season for Inter Miami. And the first one is 0.88, and that is the expected goal differential between the first part of the season and the second part of the season. And I looked exactly at the game and point in time where I felt Inter Miami lost for being too conservative for the last time and decided we need to switch this up, which was that 3-0 loss in Cincinnati on July 16th. From that point, or rather up until that point, in Inter Miami's MLS games, they were averaging 1.6 expected goals, 1.68 expected goals per game. After, it jumps up to 2.36. So you're talking about more than half a goal leap from the first half of the season to the second half. And the expected goals allowed actually drops from 1.53 to 1.35. And we pinpointed this as it was happening. That Cincinnati game, all we did was come on here and rant about how they were playing too conservatively and they were not putting Messi and Suarez and Jordi Alba in positions to succeed. And then we started talking about how they were doing that. And then we stopped talking altogether about how this team was too conservative, because they had changed their philosophy and they were playing higher up the field and they were letting Jordi Alba get forward and all these great things. And when you look at the expected numbers, they improve dramatically. Almost, as I mentioned, the numbers 0.88 expected goal difference change. Almost an entire goal per game difference in terms of not just how many they score, but also how many fewer they allow, by taking this more aggressive front foot attacking approach. And we can almost pinpoint the exact game it happened.
I'm not surprised by that, because there definitely was a shift towards Inter Miami playing a lot more exciting football, a lot more on the front foot, making sure they're taking the game to the opposition. I think one game that actually showcases that, where Inter Miami plays slightly defensively and then changes tactics and absolutely blows the team out of the water, was the last game against Nashville, where you have the first half when Inter Miami is trying to be a little bit more conservative, sitting back, defending. And then the next half, they completely change it with the same personnel. And I think the takeaway here, the story of the season here, is you see the first chunk of 8 games that Inter Miami had an unbeaten run for. I think we won 6 of those, drew 2, something like that. We were playing, I think most of the scorelines there were 1-0, 2-1, 1-1. It was very limited differential between the scorelines. And Inter Miami was primarily playing as a very robust defensive team. Something happened after those 8 games where we kind of fell off a cliff. And that defensive robustness, I think it might be starting Lujan, not playing Ian Frey. And we can have those conversations as well slightly later. But we stopped being a defensively robust team. And the idea that came to my mind was that being a defensive team is not in this team's DNA. Like, these players, this set of players cannot be that park the bus, absorb pressure, and then get a result sort of a team. We need to be the team that plays on the front foot. We can't just be the ones who are passing the ball in the back and eventually walking the ball into the net. This has to be a team that's dynamic in the final third, taking all the passes being line breaking and offensive actions being immense. And I think after that Cincinnati game, it's kind of completely changed. Over the last 10 games, I believe we won 6 of them, 7 of them, and 1 draw, 1 loss. So it has definitely been a massive change in how the philosophy of the team has evolved over time. And credit to Javier Mascherano. He's definitely listened to the Drive Pink dialogue.
Well, and I think that the thing about this stat in particular is it matches the eye test.
Yeah.
We spent so much time talking about how you are a Lionel Messi, Luis Suarez, Jordi Alba led team. You have to be a front foot team. And they weren't. And That's Javier Mascherano's preferred style. We talked about them spending too much time protecting the center backs. And then they took a more aggressive approach, and their defense got better. Like they actually improved defensively as well because everyone was in better form. The whole team played better in both phases of play. So this one absolutely matches the eye test, in my opinion. They were a defensive-focused team relying on Messi and Luis Suarez to be great. And then they lent, they really, yeah, thank you. They leaned in, thank you so much. They leaned into what this team is built to be, which is, Messi, Suarez, front foot, Jordi Alba up the left side, and score a bunch of goals. And if our defenders give up one on the other way because they couldn't make it happen one-on-one, so be it. And I think that's what this team always should have been. And I am very grateful that they got there. And now, when we look at the overall season picture, the numbers look pretty good. They were not on pace for 65 points when this transition happened. They were not on pace to match their goal total from last year. And now that they've made this adjustment, they've scored more goals. They've given up way fewer goals in the second half of the season. And they climbed up the table and are now in really good form and have scored a ton of goals heading into the playoffs.
And honestly, I don't think it was just about getting in better form. The goals were always there. Like Inter Miami is a team that's meant to score this many goals. So the 0.88 jump may seem like a big jump, but it wasn't because players got in better form. I think we just utilized those players a lot better. Like the goals were always there in this team. It wasn't just about a purple patch from one player or Messi just going completely crazy. I think overall, you utilize the team setup a lot better to make sure we become successful and reach our potential. I think that's what I take away from this particular stat.
Yeah, and listen, all of that's related, right? If you're using your players better, they're going to be used better.
They're going to feel better, yeah.
And they're going to feel better as a result of it. So it is all related. Okay, let's get to the next one. And these are intertwined, really. And the number I wanted to say, or headline with, is 15. And that is the number of goal contributions Jordi Alba's had since they made this change. Before, in the first 28 games of Jordi Alba's season, up until this point, he had 6 goal contributions. 28 games, 6 goal contributions. Since this point, 18 games, 15 goal contributions. He went from almost being an afterthought in this dynamic lineup to being the star, one of the star players. And he's now had, I think, his best goal-scoring season of his career, has been a dynamite player for Inter Miami. And every single time Inter Miami gets a win, we are giving an award to Jordi Alba for his outstanding performance. And if not Luis Suarez, if not Lionel Messi, the player most impacted and I think representative of this change is Jordi Alba. We talked about it at the time. We talked about it as, I think it matches the eye test. He was given a free role to go be an offensive playmaker. There's even a couple games where they moved him up. So he was a left winger, a left midfielder, whatever you want to call it. But this is including his time as a left back. He was too defensive early in the season. We make a change as a team, and he is the sort of fundamental point in that change, and the results just flow in.
I would love to be a fly on the wall for when that conversation happened between Javi Mascherano and Jordi Alba, where I'm pretty sure Jordi Alba was like, Coach, you're putting shackles on my hand that nobody wants, and I just want you to unleash me because I will contribute so much more to this team if you just let me be. And I'm pretty sure whatever it is in Spanish, Javier Mascherano would have said, he would just have been, go on, son. That's what he would have said. Just do your thing. Shine bright. And I feel like that was the adjustment. Just let Jordi Alba be Jordi Alba. That's all Javier Mascherano needed to do. And the difference is there. I think in the first half of the season, I thought to myself, wow, This does not look like the player who almost won the Defensive Player of the Year, who had the most goal contributions as a left back in the league last season. This looks like a shell of a player. And we could both see it wasn't because he was out of form. It wasn't the same conversation as Luis Suarez. His contributions were down because he wasn't allowed to do what he was most capable of doing. And the switch happened when you just unleash him completely. And the stats are there, and so is the eye test. I think this is the complete match here.
Yeah, I think 100%. And that does have to make everyone feel good going into the playoffs. That Jordi Alba's playing the right role. And even these numbers, going back to the last stat, they are a significantly better team now than they were in the first half of the season, the first, 65% of the season, because they've made this change. And the eye test does sort of resemble that, I think. Okay, oh God, this one's... Inter Miami's played 52 games this year so far. The number is 21, and it's the number of times Lionel Messi has won our Heron of the Match after a game. He only played 22 games last year in all competitions. And this year, 21 Herons of the Match from the Drive Pink Dialogue. His numbers are way up across the board, 3,600 minutes. Compared to last year, only 1,700 minutes. Part of the reason Inter Miami's been able to maintain a pace that got them to this point, especially early in the season when we were really a defensive team and hoping Messi and Suarez would pull out some magic, is because Messi played so many games compared to last year. Again, he won 21 man of the matches this year, only played 22 total games last season. So huge improvement from the availability of Lionel Messi, and of course the impact follows. Wherever Messi goes.
If you had asked me to guess that, I would have said 10, 12 out of 52 games. 21 is wild. I would love to see what the next best number would be. I'd say somewhere between 5 to 10.
If that.
If that. But oh my goodness. But I'm surprised by how much we actually had to give him the Heron That Flew North award. But the more I think about it and think about his performances, yeah, he deserved them. It wasn't like we were giving him the Heron of the Match award just for the sake of giving him the Heron of the Match award. And I feel like there must have been games where we wanted to give it to him, but we were like, you know what? We gave it to him last week. Let's give it to somebody else. I think
that is true. I
Yeah.
do think when we give that award out, we tend to say, maybe a tie goes to someone else just because
Absolutely.
Messi is going to get next week. So
even though we were biased against Messi, he's managed to bag 21 Heron of the Match awards. Fantastic. We should have probably done one on how many Heron the Flew North awards we gave to Allende, because that would have been something similar. But I'm not surprised by this stat even one bit.
Now, I will say it's not all sunshine and rainbows for Messi. The numbers are up because the number of minutes played are up. Again, more than double the number of minutes so far this year than he played last season. But the goal contribution numbers on a per 90 basis are actually down kind of a lot. And I do also think this is part of the story of the season, especially early in the season, when we were over-reliant on Messi performing magic, and we weren't putting him in a spot to succeed as healthy as maybe we should have, right? If you gear everything towards Lionel Messi, he's going to be even better. And if you gear things away from Messi, he's still going to be really good. But what we need to do as a team is maximize what he can be. And so last season, where I think we did that virtually every game, he had almost 2 goal contributions per 90, 1.83. That's down this year to 1.37. So almost half a goal contribution per 90. That's a lot. I mean, that's what Telasco Segovia does all season. That's what Baltasar and Allende, that's what most attacking players do all season. The 0.5 drop from last year. Just, for the record, if he had done what he did last season, we're talking about 80 goal contributions on the season. Which would have been ridiculous, but also he was doing it last year. So when we're talking about setting players up to our attacking players up to succeed in the first half of the season, I do think that affected this number. And then when we're talking about how many total minutes played, I also think that impacted this number, where Messi maybe could have used a little bit more rest here and there to keep his efficiency ultra high. Now, what are we talking about here? Is 1.37 goal contributions per 90 not enough? Of course it is. But I
So
did
what
think
you
that
just
was
told
interesting.
me was that we lost from Messi in entire players' goal contributions, and he still had 1.37 goal contributions after losing a zero point 0.5, which is an entire player's worth of goal contributions.
Yes.
The fact that
And
he got to
also, he's the
1.89
MVP.
last season. Yeah, he's the MVP. He has 49 goal contributions. Listen, we're being nitpicky here, but it's a valid
Well,
point.
it's in relation to everything else we're talking about here
Yeah,
because it's part of the
absolutely.
story.
And we can justify it, right? Like I understand why it's fallen down. The play style has been different. Inter Miami took a while to understand how this team wants to play. We've already spoken about the first half of the season where Inter Miami was playing a lot more defensive. The dynamism wasn't there. The approach play was completely different, and you could tell that yes, Messi was getting goal contributions, but he really came into his own towards the end of that season, right? Towards that second half of the season, his numbers just went skyrocketing. And it's understandable why it went down when you're playing under a newer coach like Javi Marciano, who's still trying to find his identity as a team. And often at times we've relied a little bit too much on passive play than active front foot play. And that's fine. I would still take Messi with 1.37 goal contributions every single time, and I think that's massive. And keeping up those numbers is not easy, so it's understandable. But does tell a story. Absolutely tells a story.
Well, and when you look at that first half of the season, you see a lot more games where he has one goal contribution, or maybe two games in a row where he doesn't have a goal contribution, and then you look at the last third when this period that we're talking about when they really transformed into a front foot attacking team. We're talking about like 2-3 goal contributions almost every single game. So it's not that he got worse as a player. I think the team had to evolve into something that was going to maximize what Messi was, and I think we got there over a sustained period of time that makes me feel good about the team going forward. Okay, next is 15th. And this is where Luis Suarez ranks in the MLS for goal contributions in 2025. It's fifth, tied for fifth among strikers. What a polarizing season he had. And I think as polarizing as of a season in terms of where the Inter Miami fans thought about him as anyone. And Allende's close, and Lujan's close, and Mascherano's close, but like Suarez was the focal point of conversations as much as anyone. And so we kind of wanted to wait until the end of the season to really evaluate where he finished. And this is where he finished in the MLS. Fifth, tied for fifth among strikers with 20 goal contributions. The four strikers that he was behind were Sam Sturridge, Peter Musa of Dallas, Eric Choupo-Moting of New York Red Bulls, and Albert Rusnak of Seattle Sounders. What do you think?
I think the polarizing aspect hasn't even come yet. It's going to get a little bit worse
Well,
with Luis Suarez when the conversation happens about whether he should stay or whether he should
okay, but
retire.
I don't know if that's the conversation for right now.
Today. Absolutely. And I agree with that. I think you have a slightly different understanding of the stat than I do. 15th on a list where he's the fifth best striker in terms of goal contributions. I think that's a drop. That's a massive drop from him.
It's certainly a drop from him. He was the
Yeah.
best striker in the MLS last year, and he was probably the second best player in the MLS last year.
And again, we're probably talking as spoiled Inter Miami fans who are used to a very high standard. But compared to last season, this has been a disappointing season from Luis Suarez. Has it been bad relative to others? Absolutely not. But then do you want Inter Miami to be compared as a regular team to other teams? Do you want its striker to be compared as a regular striker to other strikers across the league? Or are we holding ourselves at a higher standard than the rest of the league? Because that would define how you would view Luis Suarez's season.
Well,
In the first aspect, when you hold him to his own standards, I think he's had a fairly poor season.
I
But then
agree.
you compare him to the rest of the league, and fifth is not bad. And you mentioned this. He's not a DP. As a non-DP, having the fifth highest goal contributions across the all the strikers in the league is actually very good return. It's just a matter of what your expectations for Suarez are. And maybe the conversation is we should lower our expectations for Suarez next season. Perhaps. But I think there's been certain games where I feel like Suarez has been more of a hindrance versus a contributor. And that's where I have my problems. But I'll stop now and let you react to this and hear your thoughts.
Well, what I'm going to say is of the strikers that were more prolific, the only one that had a teammate that was even remotely close in terms of output was Sam Surridge and Hani Mukhtar, who both finished with 29 goal contributions. For Inter Miami, Luis Suarez is actually the third highest goal contributor on Inter Miami's roster. And of course, Lionel Messi is top in the league by a wide margin. And so I think when we're talking about him being fifth, Peter Musa at Dallas is asked to be everything. And it does it at a much less efficient pace. Dallas does it at a much less efficient pace. So, I guess the reason I wanted to bring this up is because it was fine. I think for the contract, it's like pretty good value. Compared to what he was last season, I think it's a huge disappointment. And I think everyone's right to say that. And, as Tony mentions in the chat, maybe if Suarez was a little bit better in his goal scoring form, Messi's numbers would have looked more similar to last season. Like maybe that's a great point. But also, it's not like he was the fifth worst striker in the MLS. It's not like he was terrible by MLS standards. The guys that we're talking about that he's in the same category as are all DP contracts. And a lot of them are having career years. And this is maybe like the worst year of Luis Suarez's career. So, like, I don't, it's not a defense of Suarez's season. It's sort of like, it was like solid in terms of the final output. And I think we all would have wanted better, especially considering what we saw last season. But I think that we're going to get to this. Like, he was like one of the better players on Inter Miami and one of the better strikers in the league.
I think it's just a matter of what you ask of Luis Suarez and what your expectations are. After the season that he had last year, the expectations were skyrocket, and that's why we, I think, are disappointed with his productivity and output. But he still has managed to trud along with how much he's been contributing to the team. So it's been a fine season from him, not nearly as good as last season. And if that's what your expectations are going to be going into the next season, I'll be happy to keep him around. But I think I still need to digest a little bit what I think about Luis Suarez and his role on this team going forward.
Yeah, I don't think this is how you start a conversation about next year. I think this is just a reflection on what happened in 2025.
Exactly.
I also did want to add, obviously, Luis Suarez had 29 goal contributions in 2024 in the MLS. That was the best MLS season by any Inter Miami striker ever. So I went back and looked at the last couple of years and specifically Higuain's 2022. And Suarez still had more goal contributions. So this is still the second best MLS season by any Inter Miami striker in terms of goal contributions. So, like, again, it's not what it was last year, obviously, but it's as good as any Inter Miami players ever had, aside from Suarez last year. So, again, it's all sort of worth keeping in perspective. Okay. My next number, this one's a little tough, 1.5. 1.5 goals allowed in games that Gonzalo Lujan started. And boy, did we give Gonzalo Lujan a lot of criticism this season. And so I ran the numbers today, and it was pretty general. But they don't show much of a difference when Gonzalo Lujan's on the field and when Gonzalo Lujan is not on the field. And I don't know if my eye test would have said that. So I want to be honest and fair. I gave Gonzalo Lujan a ton of criticism. Their record in games that he starts is better than in games where he doesn't start. The number of goals allowed is actually very slight. They're basically the same in terms of in games he starts versus games he doesn't start. The expected goals allowed is a little bit in favor of when he doesn't play or doesn't start, but it's small. So the team's not worse when Gonzalo Lujan starts, according to the output and the results. And that did not pass my eye test. What do you think?
If I had control of the backstage mechanics, I would have taken you off screen and muted you, because what are you talking about, man? That is wild. The fact that those statistics actually exist just goes to show that stats count for absolutely nothing. I will die on the hill that says Gonzalo Lujan is the worst defender in the history of Inter Miami. I can't believe these stats. My eye test refuses to believe it. It's been terrible seeing him play. So there must be some underlying reason for why him being on the pitch has made Inter Miami perform slightly better. I don't understand it, and we maybe need to do a little bit more digging into it. But that is crazy. And he's been better than Maxi Falcone. He's been better than Noah Allen. Well, better is a difficult word to use in this case, but his presence in the field has yielded better results than Maxi Falcone, Noah Allen, Toto Aviles, which is either all our defenders are utterly poor or there's some validity to this statistic. I don't know.
I'm going to start by giving Javier Mascherano a little bit more credit with regards to choosing Lujan so often.
So he does look at advanced stats. What a liar.
Maybe. I want to be fair, and just those are the numbers, and they're pretty similar when he starts or doesn't start. It doesn't seem like he has a huge impact. The actual production is a little bit better when he starts. The expected production is a little bit worse, but it's very marginal. I could come up with a bunch of theories on why what I'm seeing is not reflected in the numbers, but that's not really the point of this episode. Maybe we can have that conversation when it comes to the offseason. But I guess I wanted to be fair to Gonzalo Lujan because I said a lot of, disregarding things about his ability this year, and it doesn't seem to be having the type of impact that I thought it would have when I started looking at these numbers.
I don't trust your source, man. I want some references and citations. I genuinely can't digest this, and I don't even know how to comprehend this because the games that we've played with Gonzalo Lujan, you can clearly see him struggling. You can clearly see Inter Miami on the back foot. This is also a stat that says we've conceded lesser goals. It's not even about winning or losing when he's on the pitch. So that must tell us that he's actually defensively doing the job that he's being asked to do, which is weird to me. So I don't know how to reconcile that with the eye test. And I guess we'll just leave the viewers and the listeners to make a judgment about Gonzalo Lujan by themselves, because this is a crazy stat to me.
One of the things I will say is that the thing that frustrates me most about his play is when he steps up to try and make a play and then gets totally
leaves a
turned.
gaping hole.
And I'm not really sure that's reflected in his individual stats. Like that doesn't necessarily come up in his, number of tackles or clearances or whatever. But you would think it would come up in terms of how many goals are allowed per game, and it's not different than what Maxi Falcone and Noah Allen and Toto Aviles are giving us. So
maybe what it is that he puts us under more pressure. He may not concede the goals, but he just puts a lot of pressure on the back line, which makes us look poor, which in turn makes us think that Lujan is bad. Maybe that's the case. Okay, that's what I'm going to rationalize this as.
Okay, well, I think you can save your vitriol for this next one because the number is negative 6.8. And that is the number of like if you protracted an entire MLS season, 34 games, it's the number of goals Oscar Ustari would have allowed that he shouldn't have allowed. Basically, his post-shot expected goals minus goals allowed. So basically, how many goals he allowed that you would be expected to save if you were an average keeper. And it's negative 6.8. For reference, last year, Inter Miami had +3. Now, his actual number is only minus 4.2 because he only played 23 games-ish. So he cost Inter Miami over 4 goals this year. Rocco Rios Novo, by comparison, had a plus 2.1. And if you extrapolated that to the whole season, it would be plus 8.16 goals. Now, I don't know if he would keep that up for the whole season, but he's clearly a significant improvement on Oscar Ustadi. And I think these numbers tell me that the single difference between last year and this year is not Gonzalo Luan. It's Oscar Ustadi. And that if we had played Rocco Rios Novo all season, we would have won the Supporter Shield and potentially, have home field advantage throughout the playoffs and whatever, whatever happens in the playoffs coming up, we will be able to look back at that and say that game would have been at home if we had started Rocco all year. So this isn't a Drake calendar conversation. It's an Oscar Ustari conversation because even Rocco Rios Novo is sort of putting him to shame. And I think the story of our bad defense all year is the goalkeeper more than anything else.
Whenever the fan base unites into a consensus, just know that that's the truth. That's the gospel. And I don't think anyone, at least in our chat or the podcasts that I listen to in and around Inter Miami, would disagree with us when they say that Rocco Rios Novo has earned the start ahead of Ustari, which is saying something. Even at his very best, Ustari was good. He was never great. He made some good saves, some saves that you would be like, hey, I'm glad that he was there and made those saves.
He had really clutch saves.
Yeah. And in some important moments.
Right.
But the fact that he had minus 4.2 post-shot expected goals, the fact that we should have conceded 4 goals less than what we did.
No.
That's a differential.
7 or 8 goals.
But for Ustari, that would be 4, right?
Okay, yes.
Specifically.
But
when Ustari was in goal...
Right, but if you had inserted Rocco or Drake based on last year, Rocco based on what he did this year, you should have saved 4 extra goals plus Ustari's a minus. So those guys are plus and Ustari's 4 minus.
And
so
that
it's
could
like
have been
a 7 or 8 goal difference.
That could have been a difference between 2 or 3 points, which would mean Inter Miami would win the Supporter Shield. Now, again, these are all hypotheticals.
Just to be clear, that's the difference between that. That could be 10 points. That's not necessarily 2 points.
I'm being conservative here, just so that we understand it better.
It's certainly worth at least 2 points.
Yeah,
which is
and again, these are hypotheticals. It's if buts and maybes, but the fact that Rocco Rios Novo has honestly earned the Inter Miami fan base's trust, especially from where he started, speaks volumes of Oscar Ustari and what his performances were for Inter Miami. There's been multiple instances where he's let the ball through his legs in crucial moments. So the pendulum always swings both sides with Ustari, and he is not good enough to be Inter Miami's starting keeper. And I'm glad that at this point, when the playoffs are here, Javi Marciano has made the decision to make Rocco Rios Novo his starting goalkeeper. And that in itself is a storyline.
I think the reason we did this episode was to point out some of the numbers that told the story of the season. And we've had this specific conversation before, but now the season's over and it's a complete picture. It is disappointing. And you're right. Ustari did have some great moments and he's won some of our awards, but actually the raw data shows he was the biggest liability on this team. It wasn't Luis Suarez. It wasn't Tadeo Allende. It wasn't Gonzalo Lujan. It was Oscar Ustadi. And I think that's maybe the biggest saddest part about, like, the biggest what if of this season is if you had just given that 22-year-old Rocco Blacco that, people in the chat were talking about from the get-go, right? First preseason game, he helps us beat Club America. Our season would have been much more successful, I think. And I feel pretty confident saying that.
It is what it is.
Okay, last one, and this is second to last one, and we saved this for last because it's the biggest conversation to lead us into the playoffs, and that's 42.31, which is Inter Miami's away winning percentage in 2025. Last year was 50%, so it's dropped 8%, which is, it's not a ton, but it's medium amount.
Maybe 3 games?
Yeah. And Inter Miami, unlike last year, does not have home field advantage throughout the playoffs, which means we might have to go to Cincinnati, to Philadelphia, to Vancouver, not to Vancouver, to Philadelphia, to Cincinnati. And if they lose one of those games because it's on the road, I think we're going to be looking at our away record this year. As an opportunity to have gotten more points, but we're going to really be looking at why didn't we start more aggressively early in the season? Why didn't we switch goalkeepers early in the season? Why didn't we do what was actually necessarily way earlier to get home field advantage? Because our away record is good, but it's not fantastic. And we're going to be having to play really good teams on the road if we have to go on the road in this playoffs.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but some of the away games, the way that we've lost has also been slightly worrying to me. That Vancouver game against Cincinnati, it's not been, and we have struggled on turf in some games, which is what we would always face. But I would be so much more comfortable going into the playoffs with home field advantage. Now, last season we did have that, and well, it didn't really play out in our favor. So maybe, just maybe, this season, not having the home field advantage works in our favor. But that Leagues Cup final against Seattle is a big reminder of why having a home ground final is just the best that could possibly happen. So if we are able to make it past the Philadelphias, the Cincinnatis, then hopefully we'll be stuck with that home field advantage. But there's going to be at least one game in the playoff where we're struggling away from home. And it doesn't fill me with confidence when we haven't performed well. We've performed well away from home. MLS is not easy. I would love to compare this to other teams, but it's still going to be squeaky bum time, that's for sure.
I think you made an interesting point about when it gets away from us at home, it can get really bad.
Yeah.
At Minnesota, we lost 4-1. You mentioned the Vancouver, Orlando City, Cincinnati. The away Leagues Cup final at Seattle. At Charlotte this year, we lost 3-0. So it's not even just the percentage; it's the performance. The performances can sometimes be uncompetitive, and that is scary, I think.
That's fair enough.
Okay, last number. Saur, I'm going to give you this number because we went through nine stats, 9 numbers that I think tell a huge portion of the story of this season. And so I wanted you, before the playoffs start, to give this season a 1 out of 10 rating. And that will be our final number of the night. As an Inter Miami fan, how did you feel about the 2025 season?
A solid 7.5 in my eyes. I'm not the stats guy you are, but I think I can definitely say this season started off very well. Not prolific, but good. 8 games undefeated. Looked like Javier Mascherano was going to be the man. We weren't able to sustain it. Midway through, it got very iffy. The vibes were quite low. And then somehow or the other, Inter Miami found a way to pick themselves up. Would falter sometimes, but then pick themselves up again. I think we finished on a bit of a high. Finished really well. In Messi winning the Golden Boot was phenomenal. I think even for the team, it's phenomenal. First player in Inter Miami history to win the Golden Boot. Messi potentially winning the MVP back to back is also a great sign. This team is in good form. We feel good about it. You can't deny we performed fantastic in the Club World Cup, which was a moment of pride for all Inter Miami fans when everyone wrote us off against some big teams. We went deep in the CONCACAF Champions Cup, lost to a Vancouver side who was very hot at that time. And then we went to the finals of the Leagues Cup, and one moment or another, it could have been completely different games. So 7.5, maybe a 7 if you want to be extra conservative, but that's what I'll call the regular season. Enjoyable in moments, frustrating in large parts. Unfortunate that we didn't win a trophy in the regular season, but the playoffs can completely change the entire narrative.
Yeah, we've had you're right. Early in the season, I think it was really frustrating. And we talked about that in this episode. And 18 games ago against the New York Red Bulls and after that Cincinnati loss, they really did shift. It was like a demarcation and a shift of what they've done. And since then, I don't think we've gotten as high as maybe we should have because the lows were really, really low. If you look at our 4 losses since that point, it was a 4-1 road beatdown by Orlando City, the 3-0 loss to Seattle in the Leagues Cup, a 3-0 loss at Charlotte, and then a couple weeks ago we lost 5-3 to Chicago. That cost us the Supporters' Shield. So they were huge ramifications to the bad moments. But that actually, if you step back, the last 18 games have been pretty good on the whole. They're scoring a ton of goals. The defense has improved, especially in the non-losses. They've been much better. And everyone's in good form, and we're heading into the playoffs, I think, with a much more confidence than we had 3 months ago. So, and I think that has to be reflected in how we see this season on a whole. So I'm with you. 7.5. Feel pretty happy about that. That's our final number for this episode. Saur, anything else before we wrap it up?
As you were saying that, I realized that Inter Miami's season has had some good highs, some very, very nice memories. In that Club World Cup, the feeling afterwards was phenomenal. But the lows this season have been extremely low. Some of the losses have been embarrassing, to say the least. Now, they've been in few moments, which is good. But I think Inter Miami now owes us a massive, massive high. And I'm hoping they've saved that for the playoffs. I've been saying this for the last 3 episodes. I'm going to say it again. The number that we should all be caring about is 5. 5 games, and this entire narrative changes. Bring it on.
Guys, that all starts Friday night. It's at 8 p.m. Eastern time, which means we'll be live 1 hour before kickoff. You guys know the drill for the pregame show. I hope you guys have a lovely week. We will see you guys next time. Have a lovely night. Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. Do us a favor and hit that like and subscribe button. Since our first viewer, sharing this with you all has been the very best part. So from the beginning until the end, thank you for being a part of this and have a wonderful day.